Okay, everyone, I believe that we are ready to begin. Good afternoon. It's so wonderful seeing you, and also greetings to all of those who have signed on virtually for what is going to be a really fantastic conversation with a dynamic panel. So I want to thank you for joining us for today's important and timely event on disinformation and free speech, perspectives on the future of information, co-sponsored by the MIT School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, the MIT School of Management, Sloan School of Management, and the MIT Libraries. We are experiencing degrees of frequency and strategic persistence, the spread of disinformation through multiple communication platforms such as podcasts, social media outlets, and self-described news outlets. So our conversation today is guided by our top experts. We'll examine the intersection of rights and responsibilities in relation to free speech, and we'll explore the ways in which we can contribute to managing disinformation and its long-term damaging impacts. My name is Alexia Hudson, and I'm proud to serve as the Associate Director of Research and Learning for the MIT Libraries. Special shout out to our Director, Chris Berg, who is here. Thank you, Chris, for all of your support. And I have the honor of serving as the moderator of our discussion with this distinguished panel. Adam Berinsky is the Mitsue Professor of Political Science at MIT. He serves as the director of the MIT Political Experiments Research Lab and is also a faculty affiliate at the Institute of Data, Systems, and Society. He is the author of In Time, Understanding American Opinion from World War II to Iraq, and Silent Voices, Public Opinion and Political Participation in America, as well as numerous journal articles. In 2016, Adam was appointed a John Simons Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellow to study how political rumors spread and how they can be effectively debunked. David Karger is a professor of computer science and a member of the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, CSAIL. He leads the Haystack Group at CSAIL, which researches information access, analysis, management, and distribution. His current research focuses on developing tools that help individuals manage information better, drawing on fields including information retrieval, machine learning, databases, algorithms, and especially human-computer interaction. David's dissertation at Stanford University received the 1994 ACM Doctoral Dissertation Award and the Mathematical Programming Society's 1997 Tucker Prize. The author of over 200 published articles and 2 patents, David became a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2019. David Rand is the Elwin I should have mentioned, please silence your phones. David Rand is the Elwin H. Sell Professor and Professor of Management, Science, and Brain and Cognitive Science here at MIT, the Director of Applied Cooperations Team, and an affiliate of the MIT Institute of Data, Systems, and Society and the Initiative on the Digital Economy. David's research combines behavioral experiments with mathematical and computational models to understand people's attitudes, beliefs, and choices on issues such as why people believe and share misinformation and fake news. He was named to Wired Magazine's Smart List of 2012 of 50 people who will change the world, and chosen as a 2012 Pop Tech Science Fellow, and awarded the 2015 Arthur Greer Memorial Prize for Outstanding Scholarly Research, Fact-Checking Researcher of the Year in 2017 by the Poynter Institute's International Fact-Checking Network, and received the 2020 FAB's Early Career Impact Award from the Society for Judgment and Decision Making. All 3 panelists are co-authors on a paper from a 2021 conference proceeding exploring lightweight interventions at posting time to reduce sharing of misinformation on social media. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. So the first question goes to Adam, and I'll request that Dave and David also weigh in as well. So the way that people receive their news has changed, and this change appears to have created more opportunities for disinformation to be transmitted. Would you talk about your research on what's happening in our current media environment and how you perceive this environment to be ripe for spreading disinformation?
That's good. Let's start with a softball.
Always.
Great. Yes. Great. No, so I mean, I think it's. So I should just say a little bit about my background. So I'm a political scientist. I study public opinion and political behavior, and I started in on this topic it's about 13 years ago now. I became interested in rumors surrounding Barack Obama's birthplace, death panels. Sort of saw things on the rise. And so kind of think about the current environment, kind of taking what I knew before and kind of applying to thinking about now. I think that there's the more things change, the more they stay the same in a lot of regards. So I think the internet has given a lot of opportunities for the spread of false information, malicious actors spreading disinformation, but these problems have been around for a very long time. Sort of that rumors, innuendo go back to the early days of the Republic. There were a whole bunch of stories that people would spread about their political enemies among the founders. So I think that there's sort of the process is nothing new, but I think that the medium has changed how easy it is for people to find a larger audience. And so thinking about disinformation in particular, I think that this is something that we really need to think about, which is not just kind of people seeking out information, but people being incidentally exposed to that information. I think that's something that hopefully I can talk a little bit more about, but I think that this, sort of the notion of incidental exposure to misinformation, disinformation is a really big problem in the current society because it's hard, if not impossible, to completely shut out politics if you're a social media user.
And to add to that, I feel like there's this sense that social media has made misinformation way worse. And that's generally something that is widely accepted in general discussions about this. I think the evidence on that is very hard to actually nail down the extent to which that's true or not. My take on it is that a lot of the misinformation and disinformation at this moment is not so much random people posting random things on social media and it going viral, but it's more sort of coordinated disinformation campaigns by political elites who then use social media as a way to broadcast that. And elites have a lot of influence and they have big platforms. And also there's this feedback between social media and traditional media where somebody says something crazy on social media, it gets reshared by a political elite, it gets a lot of engagement, and then all of the newspapers write about it, and then all of a sudden everybody's heard about it. And I think one feature of social media which does have a potential to really be different from other media, and I haven't seen much good empirical study of this, but it's something that my group is working on, is when you see a piece of news on social media, it's coming from a particular person and it's got all these social signals attached to it of how many other people liked it and believed it, and sometimes who of your friends shared it or whatever. And so I think that has the potential to make information that you consume through social media more impactful than things that you consume otherwise, because it has this kind of social signal attached to it. But I think how big that effect is still sort of an open question.
And my take is focused on the technology because that's what I study. I'm not a social scientist. And what I see is the ways that technology and the social platforms have made everything, as Adam said, nothing is new, but everything is more efficient.
Right.
The technology that we have, the platforms that we have, allow information to be delivered much faster and allow it to spread much more quickly. It allows much more efficient targeting of information to specific people and sort of selection of who's going to see what, both by the individual who's looking, but also by advertisers or other actors who want to get their information in front of specific eyes. Basically, everything is just working much better. Much more efficient efficiently, and sometimes that has good consequences, and sometimes that has terrible consequences.
And actually, one thing to add to that that is like an intersection of the technological and the psychological is that I think also when people are on social media, they're engaging with it in a very different way than you would engage with a news website or a newspaper or something, which is you're scrolling really quickly and the news is mixed in with, baby pictures and cat videos and whatever else. And so you're not thinking about it in like, with the same kind of critical lens that you might use if you're sitting down to read about the news.
Right.
And so I think we've done a lot of research suggesting that sort of inattention and just forgetting to even think about whether things are accurate or not plays a big role in people's sharing of inaccurate content online.
Yeah, that's what our shared paper was about, actually. I'll also just mention concentration as something that has
Right.
emerged. Right, the relatively small number of sources that are now delivering the information, I think, is also having a significant impact. It means different pieces of information can't compete the same way as they used to be able to when there were many channels.
Adam, please go ahead.
Oh, that's right. Sort of add something to what David said. Reminded me that sort of that David just mentioned that when you're scrolling through a news feed, it's not like you're sitting down with sort of a newspaper or watching a TV show sort of that's focused on politics. But what I would say is that David heard this millions of times. I says that most of the people, most of the time, don't care about politics. And so I think traditional media has been set up in a way that, think about like who's reading daily newspapers, no one anymore, but they'll go to the websites online. But in the past and today, that's a small segment of the population. I think one thing that has changed is that by mixing this sort of news content in with entertainment, that you're exposing a larger portion of the population to that content. I think it plays very well into what both David and David said in terms of the fact that by receiving it through this medium, you're reaching people who you would not ordinarily reach with news content, and that can be dangerous when we're thinking about sort of things like disinformation. The other thing I said, like we've been talking about disinformation and misinformation, and we know what that is, but sort of definitions for folks is sort of misinformation is factually inaccurate or unsupported claims. Disinformation gets at the intent of the sender, right? Is it someone who's trying to spread misinformation? Now, it's a tricky thing because if I spread disinformation, you receive it and you spread it, you're not spreading disinformation by that definition if you believe it.
Right.
But I think what I think is very important is to think about something that David Rand mentioned as well, is thinking about the actors who are pushing these agendas.
Yes.
And that's what makes things really important to think about this difference between disinformation and misinformation from the perspective of the people who are pushing those stories.
Yeah, thank you so much for the clarity between those, because I know that many people kind of merge the two, and there is very much a distinction. And I kind of want to weave together some essential points that the three of you made in relation to this notion of the political elite, these kind of incidental activities that take place, or these incidental touch points through which disinformation is spread, and then also the kind of human-computer interaction and the ways in which we have now multiple touch points within various technologies, not just simply platforms, to be exposed to this information. So can we talk a little more first about how would we define this group of actors who are the political elite, if you will?
So the political scientists. I didn't study political science. I got sort of, maybe 2016 started getting into political science. I feel like Adam has taught me a lot about political science, and I feel like the two things that I learned most from getting to know political scientists are most people don't care about politics, which I didn't realize, and elites are super powerful.
Right. Yeah. So I think we're talking about elites. So we're talking about not just politicians, but sort of party leaders, right? The folks who are pushing political narratives.
Also, media people like Hannity or whatever,
Right. Yeah, so it's kind of like this broad, and so elite is it's a technical term, not a term of art, right? So we're not saying like, oh, these are the best, right, people, but these are the people who set the agenda for politics, and plays into the other thing is that most of the people most of the time don't pay attention to politics. So if you're someone who's setting the agenda, you can have a lot of power because you can focus, you can get people to focus on the kinds of themes, the kinds of narratives that you want them to, and they aren't necessarily going to critically reflect on that because they're like, oh, you're right, I'm not really paying attention. Oh, election coming up, what's going on here? And so I think thinking about the stream there, it's very much a top-down model of political communication, in that sort of that people at the top set the agenda, they disperse their messages, and this has become especially, think about things that have changed. One thing that has changed over the last 30, 40 years is that the United States has become much more politically polarized, right? And that kind of that what it means to be a Democrat or Republican ties up not just your political identity, but your social identity. Maybe we'll talk about COVID misinformation time here that really plays into it. It's sort of that, right? I was at a medical conference over the summer. I was talking to doctors, and they said, like, I just don't know how to give advice to my patients because someone comes in and they says, well, I'm a Republican, so I don't believe in the vaccine, right? And so that's just, right, that's just kind of like, how do you have that discussion? But that is something that is part of the identity. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a long history of how polarization developed, but it's not necessarily that people became more informed about politics. What happened is that the choices that were given to people by political elites have simplified over time. And this is what we call sorting. Right, so it used to be, it's like when I was growing up, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in New York City, there were Republicans, right? And there were Northern Republicans who were very liberal. There were Southern Democrats who were very conservative. Over time, that there's been a sorting in that conservatives have become more Republican, liberals have become more Democrat at the elite level. And that's reflected in how people are approaching at the mass level. You pick a team, and you hear your message. And 40 years ago, the message might have been more diverse. Like you could be a Democrat, but you could be hearing different kinds of things. You could be a Republican, you could be hearing liberal on social issues, conservative on fiscal issues. That doesn't happen anymore. So even though people aren't more engaged with politics now than they were 40 years ago, the choices have become more stark. And I think that plays a really important role in how we think about how the mass public interacts with political news, through social media, but also through traditional media as well.
And I can speak to sort of the technological aspect of that sorting, which again comes back to the efficiency, right? The tools that we have now are much better at helping us sort intentionally, right? I don't know, over a decade ago, Sean Munson did a nice paper where he was thinking about how it'd be really good if people read diverse media. And he built a tool to help people read diverse media and discovered that they don't like it. They just want to read the stuff that they agree with.
Right.
And the tools have gotten better and better at only delivering to us the stuff that we want, which is the stuff that we agree with. So we never see the thoughtful opinions of people who disagree with us and might change our minds. So this is another example of, well, we want something, right? We want homophily. We want to sort of gather with the people who are like us. We want to be sheltered from ideas that disagree with our preconceptions. And our tools have made it have become much more efficient at doing this for us.
And this is something where I feel like there's a lot of debate in the scientific community around this echo chamber kind of idea. And my sort of sense of it is that, so first of all, most people don't care about politics, and people that don't care about politics aren't really in echo chambers because they don't really care. The people that care about politics are in echo chambers in the sense that they very much preferentially sort of follow people with similar opinions. That doesn't actually necessarily mean that they don't get exposed to counter-attitudinal content, but it's that most of the way you get exposed to counter-attitudinal content is by co-partisans dunking on it.
Yes.
And
exactly.
so you're
So
not
it's
getting
even
thoughtful
worse than not hearing about it
right.
at all.
You're not getting thoughtful engagement with people on the other side. Right. It's like, here's a really extreme, stupid thing that someone from the other side said, and here's this person dunking on it.
But what's interesting is that the people who aren't paying attention see all that, right? And so that gets at this incidental exposure.
Right.
So
Right.
So the people who don't, right? So that the existence of echo chambers, even if it's only a small portion of the population, has important implications for the larger information ecosystem. In that, right, if you're just scrolling through your feed and you have some friends who are Republican and some who are Democrat, I don't know who has that anymore, but right, if you did, right, then you would basically just see this, this horrible back and forth. But let's say that you're someone who is kind of identifies as a Republican. You're not engaged yourself, but
Right.
what you'll see is what your friends are doing, which is basically, here is a Republican talking point. Here's something ridiculous that a Democratic politician said, and I'm going to dunk on that. So I think I think what's an important point to add to what David just said is that even if echo chambers are small, which they are, they can still be important for people who aren't in those chambers because it affects what's in the larger media environment.
Totally, and one of the first papers that we did on misinformation and fake news was showing that simply being exposed to false claims makes you subsequently believe them more. Even if you're a smart person, so being like a more critical thinker and more like cognitively sophisticated doesn't mitigate that effect. It's like a really low level cognitive effect where just like things that come to mind more quickly seem more true. And it was also equally true for sort of false claims about your side as it was false claims about the other side. So like this exposure is a very powerful force.
And it was even true if the misinformation was later corrected, right? You would still persist in
Right.
hanging on to some of
Yeah,
it.
there's this whole like corrections in general like tend to correct, and you don't get backfires where once something gets corrected then people believe it more because they dig in or whatever. That sort of idea has been gotten in general pretty debunked. But there is this sense that corrections tend to fade. And so like when you
And
get a
fade
correction,
very quickly.
it corrects temporarily and then you kind of forget about the
Go back to the
correction, and
mistake.
that the first thing in is lasts longer.
Also, just picking up what Adam said about how even if you're not in the echo chambers, I think even aside from the echo chambers, I feel, and again, this is a social science thing, so I'm a layperson speculating, but it seems to me that social media has also just encouraged a coarsening of conversation. Like you just say nastier things about the people that you disagree with, and everybody sees them. And this is known. Like people absorb from their environment, right? If the standard style of conversation is to say, if what you see is everybody saying nasty things about other people, then that's what you tend to do also. And so I think it just sort of everything has been dragged down, and this pushes people away from looking for consensus or trying to understand other views.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because this segues into another question that I have for first David Rand, and then, of course, David and Adam, I want you to share your perspectives as well. So you've authored several articles that explores the concept of analytical thinking as a measure of susceptibility to fake news and hyperpartisan behavior. And we know from the research that there are at least two types of reasoners, and those who are more analytical versus those who are sometimes described as intuitive. And it appears that the so-called intuitive reasoners tend to be more susceptible to disinformation. So what else is important to share about these intuitive reasoners that would help to combat their vulnerability to disinformation?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we've done has been taking this kind of cognitive science perspective on what makes people susceptible to believing false claims. And right after the 2016 election, when suddenly everybody was talking about fake news and all of that, and like how could people believe all these crazy claims, I feel like a thing that came up a lot was this idea that reasoning gets hijacked by your partisan identities, and getting people to engage in more reasoning is not actually good because they just use that reasoning to defend their identities and so on. And so that explains why people believe crazy things. And we were like, oh, that seems interesting. Let's actually test that. And we ran a bunch of studies and are just totally not consistent with that. It's just like thinking is good in general. And like people who engage in more thinking are less likely to believe false claims. They're less likely to believe conspiracy theories. It's just like critical thinking is good. And also you can see that like causal evidence that if you distract people while they're evaluating headlines, so we could do it in one paper, we like make people hold like an 8-digit number in memory and respond quickly while they're reading the headlines versus people just do it normally. And when you distract the people, it doesn't affect how much they believe the true claims, but it selectively makes them more likely to believe the false claims, again, regardless of whether it aligns with their politics or not. So it's just sort of like thinking is good. And I think that's also another thing that makes social media potentially more problematic than some other ways of consuming news, is because you're scrolling quickly and you're looking at the cat videos and whatever, like you're not thinking carefully. And so it makes you yeah, just like a less critical examiner of the content that you're looking at. And so then the question that you sort of ask is, okay, what do we do about it?
Right.
And so I think that there are various different like attempts to get people to like train people to think more critically. I think that's very hard. So you know, that's rough. Part of it is just sort of knowing who is going to potentially be more susceptible, and therefore who you should be, you know, more, if you're going to target other interventions, like, you know, who might get the most out of that. But another thing is that is related, is this idea of inattention. Like we were saying, when you're scrolling quickly, part of it is just you're not thinking that much. But the other thing is when you are thinking, you're not in general thinking about, is this true or not? Because the social media context, like most of the stuff that you're seeing, truth isn't relevant. Like, is this baby picture true or not? Just like, that's not relevant. It's like, is it funny? Or like, what do other people think about it? Or, you know, like, if I were to share it, how many likes would I get? Or whatever. And so people's attention is just like directed to all these kinds of social factors. And so we've shown that just minimal interventions to refocus people's attention on the concept of accuracy can make them substantially more discerning in what they decide to share. Because most people don't want to share inaccurate content. Most people don't want to have inaccurate beliefs. They're just not really thinking about it because it's not the thing that's top of mind in that environment. And if you take people who, in the context of like work or something, would think really carefully about accuracy and like not making mistakes, they log onto social media, you know, they're just not thinking about it. Like, I've done it myself. Like, I definitely at least once like shared something because I thought it was funny. And then someone, like a couple hours later, was like, "Wait, is that actually true?" And I was like, "Oh shit!" Like I did exactly the thing that we're writing all the papers about.
You got me.
I just like didn't think about it. And so that is something that I think is much easier to intervene on than getting people to be more critically thinking in general. Is just remember, like, think about whether something is accurate before you share it, and like. The social media companies have built this environment in which the attention is focused elsewhere. And so you need to do sort of systemic level things to try to refocus attention on the concept of accuracy.
Yeah. And just picking up on that, like, these are conscious choices by the platforms, the design choices, right? I mean, so I'm old. I still use a news reader, an RSS news reader to consume a lot of content. And I have separate folders, right? I have my news folder and I have my funny things folder, and I read them.
Wrong with
I
that.
read them separately, right? And so when I'm reading stuff in the news folder, I am in one state of mind, and when I am reading things in the news folder, I'm in the funny folder, I'm in a different state of mind. And the social media platforms have chosen to smear those things together, right? They don't have to. There could be two separate tabs in your feed, one for news and one for cat pictures, right? That's a design choice. They presumably see benefit in having it all smeared together. It probably increases engagement because that's why they do everything.
And also in terms of the like saying, you might say, oh well, like, you know, it's such a big task. How could they, you know, successfully get people to think about accuracy or like refocus their attention? But like the whole business model is built on getting people to pay attention to things they don't want to pay attention to, namely ads, right? And so they can use some of the muscle that is developed for getting people to pay attention to ads to get them to pay attention to other more sort of socially beneficial things.
I mean, to add to this, I think that kind of underlying both these comments is think about the design decisions that are made. So I don't know if that's where we're going to go next or some point. But I think, you know, it's very important to think about, you know, one thing that David said is that, you know, people want to share accurate content, right? Think about what is it that they actually want to do. And the question is, how can you design a system that enables people to do what they want to do, right? It's not a paternalistic kind of thing like, oh, we want you to share more accurate information. That's what people want to do. And and think about these design decisions, I think, is really important, right? With the goal of enabling people to have an interactive experience with their news feed or whatever, you know, Twitter squirrel, you know, whatever it is that meets their desires, right? And so I think like thinking about like the paper that we all worked on together is thinking about like what are the design decisions that can be made in the context of enabling people to reach their goals that would also serve a greater public purpose in making it sort of making, you know, this incidental exposure a better experience than it is at the moment.
Right, so it's helping people do what they want to do rather than manipulating them into doing something that they don't want to do, but we think would be good for them.
Right.
Also, it occurs to me, I'd say from a conflict of interest perspective, that I don't know about David, but Adam and I have both worked with Facebook and Google on various different misinformation-related things. And Twitter, that's right.
So, there's a good point, yes. Very good.
Well, so just a fair warning, Adam, anything that you respond to is going to be something that David said. So you may want to be careful about clarifying.
And it's interesting that we're going down this path of kind of designed choices among these, different entities and the ways in which we can potentially influence design so as to help individuals kind of sort through the messiness, if you will, of disinformation. And it's in that spirit that my next question is to you, David. And of course, asking that Dave and Adam also weigh in, knowing that you've conducted research on personal information management and information retrieval. One of the most striking things that I've encountered is when people are really on a campaign to spread disinformation, they come with receipts. They come with all this curated, amazing disinformation assets, right? And they seemingly have spent a lot of time kind of curating and cultivating these different assets to then, advance their particular statement or their particular cause. So would you discuss how you see the connections between information retrieval methodologies and the spread of disinformation, and what can we do to fix it? We're talking about design, but what does that really mean?
Yeah, design is at the center of my research. What my group is always thinking about is what tools would be better, and how should we change the designs of the tools that people are using. We recognize that in order to inform those decisions, we need to. There's a division described in our community between the studiers and the builders, right? There are people who study the way things are and how people behave, and then there are people who try to build things. And the builders definitely need to listen to the studiers, right? That's very important. But my group is a builder group, and a sort of a common thread in the work that we've done in this area is really around individual autonomy, trying to create designs that, as David Rand was saying, give individuals more control and more power to have these tools work the way that those people want, right? So we've done this with online harassment, for example, where different people have different notions of what harassment is. So why are we expecting the platforms to decide that something is or is not harassment, right? Isn't it up to the individual who's being harassed to decide if it is or it isn't harassment? But the platforms don't allow the individual to have that power, right? And similarly with misinformation and disinformation and such, we've fallen into this practice of saying, well, the platforms ought to do something about this. And my group is thinking much more about how we can empower individuals to do something about this. Because different people have different opinions about what is and is not misinformation. And I think it's almost as dangerous to think that the platforms will do it properly as it is to worry that they'll do it improperly. Like just to cede to these large platforms the decision about what is true and what is not seems incredibly dangerous to me. So what we're interested in building is tools that let every individual assert what is true and what is not. And this comes to your question about these curated piles of disinformation and stuff. One of the things that I think is really missing from platforms nowadays is provenance. Like, where did that information come from? We've been talking a lot about people making their own decisions about whether something is accurate or not. But I believe that the majority of what an individual believes comes from what they've heard from people and sources that they trust. How many of us have actually gone and checked whether global warming is happening? Right? Like, I haven't spent the past 50 years checking the thermometer, right? Yeah. I have identified sources that I believe to be trustworthy sources, and they tell me global warming is happening, and so I believe it. And that's how I assess information about. So there's limits to what I can do myself because I have limited knowledge. And so what we're trying to do in our research is sort of envision a platform where people can explicitly indicate their trust relationships And individuals can explicitly make contributions of assessments about whether information is accurate or not. And this would allow people to leverage the tools to act on their behalf, to say, only show me information that has been assessed as accurate by sources that I trust, right? It's not up to the platform. The platform is responsible for doing what I tell them to sort of deliver the information that I want, the way that I want it to be delivered, right? There was, actually, my work in this area started from a weird thing that happened a decade ago. This was before COVID, but there was already vaccine denial. And I started getting a lot of anti-vax posts in my Facebook feed. Why was this happening? Because, from people I didn't know. It was happening because one of my friends who was a doctor was commenting on anti-vax posts and explaining why they were wrong. Okay? Now, when Facebook sees comments on a post, that's a sign of engagement, and so they spread that post farther. Right? So I was seeing these posts because my friend was commenting on them and saying that they shouldn't be shared, or saying that they were wrong. Right? So this is, again, the way the platforms are not, like, my friend did not have the appropriate lever to say, I want to downgrade this post. Right? Instead, the only signal that they could provide was one that Facebook took as an upgrade of the post.
And I think that, like, an obvious concern when you talk about letting people curate their experience is if we think that there are, part of the problem is that there's some chunk of people that essentially like want the disinformation or trust the elites that are broadcasting the disinformation, then they're going to select into getting that information from those elites. And I think that that is a real problem. But I also think something that Adam was saying is interesting to think about in the context of this, which is that if most people don't actually care about the politics that much, most people probably don't want to hear it at all.
Right.
And so it allows the sort of design that David is talking about could potentially allow most people to select out of the incidental exposure from the like high politics people in their echo chambers doing their thing.
Yeah. No, this actually ties into some other research that I've done with Teppei Yamamoto, who's another political science professor, and some other folks here, is like we look at this question of choice. Like, do you want to watch political news or not political news? So we did experiments where we essentially give people choices. Like, do you want to watch Fox? Do you want to watch MSNBC? Or do you want to watch an entertainment program? And the really tricky thing about designing that experiment was it was really hard to find an entertainment program that people wouldn't select at massively greater rates than those other two. Like, and we started saying, and basically we needed to get some leverage there. And so, you put in any entertainment program, it's like 70, 80%. So we went down to like a shopping network like program and stuff, so we could get some leverage there. And what we found is that it's the people who choose entertainment are the people that are the most persuadable, which ties into different themes. But it's a very small portion of the population that wants to select into these news. So I think two things are like, sort of enabling these, people to select into their, a conservative news feed or a liberal news feed. Like, yeah, there are some potential dangers, right? And I think that the experience of January 6, 2001 shows like this is a potential danger, right? Like this is 2021. Thank you.
2021. Yes.
Thank you. No, it's good. Hey, fact check. That's spreading this information. But I think the bigger problem is, right, that these people who don't want it are persuadable if they're exposed to it. And so, I think kind of that if we were to let people pick their feeds, people are like, oh my God, we'll go down this echo chamber. They'll only hear, from one side, which is true of some portion of the population. But I think the larger portion is like, thank God that I don't have to hear about politics. I can just focus on the things that I want to. I think by giving people that choice, I think it aligns with their preferences, right? Like we're not forcing them
into
something.
Probably less polarized and less hating of the people on the other
So
side.
the kind of thing about design, I think that the constant theme here is that design decisions that are focused on what the user actually wants.
Yeah.
Like, sort of the popular press is worried, like, oh my God, we're going to have these, these curated feeds of garbage. Like, actually, that's not what it's going to be. People are going to run away from politics, and the people who want to run away from politics are the people who we really should be catering to with this feed.
Yeah. I do think it's worth being a little careful when we talk about what people want, right? Because there's at least two levels of wanting, right? So TikTok is really good at figuring out what you want to see right this second, right? But when we talk about design and individual curation, right? I mean, what is it, Harari? The happiness versus satisfaction. Who is that? Is it Harari or? Anyway, there's a philosopher who talks about sort of your sort of pleasure in the moment versus how you feel sort of looking back over the long run about how you spent your time, right? And TikTok may be great at showing you a thing that will give you pleasure now, but if you have time to sort of think and reflect, what sort of curation do I want to create so that at the end of this week, after I've spent a week consuming this material, I feel like I've had, a healthy meal rather than dining on candy all week long, right? You're going to make I think that many people will make good choices. I also think this gets to more of a philosophical question. Like we don't know if it's good or bad for people to make their own choices, but there is a philosophical argument for allowing them to do so, whether it is good or bad, right? Just an autonomy argument.
And how do you design to ensure that free speech is at the center of it, or do you not, right?
Well, again, free speech being at the center ought to be a choice of the users, not to be something that's forced upon them by the platform, right? I don't feel that a platform should force people to see diverse content, right? Like maybe somebody doesn't want to see diverse content. Why is that our choice? I happen to be a big fan of free speech, but again, I think where the platforms have fallen down is that they don't let individuals choose whether to listen or not. Right. So again, it's autonomy to choose what you hear. It's not only about giving you the power to say, like, sure, all the platforms let you say what you want within certain limits, but they don't let me decide not to listen to the crazy person.
Well, they are making decisions themselves.
Yes,
about what to
they
amplify
choose.
or not to.
Yeah.
And my take on this is that on the free speech issue is that for a lot of the things that I am studying that are essentially like what are interventions that platforms could do to reduce the spread of misinformation, I feel like for a lot of things there is an inherent tension between freedom of speech and suppressing of misinformation. And I feel like there's like some kinds of trade-off that needs to get made there. And it's like, I think that's part that will make this hard.
Yeah.
Although the tension is exacerbated by leaving it up to the platform. Right?
Yeah.
If you allow the individuals to make the decisions about what they want to hear and what they consider to be misinformation, it's not a global tension anymore. It's something that each individual can navigate.
I think another important point that we have brought up, I think it's important, is that the status quo is what the platforms are doing at the moment. And continuing the status quo is a choice, right? So I think a lot of the discussion, is sort of, as Dave said, didn't work with Facebook, and right, discussion like, well, we can't make choices. And so like, well, by continuing the status quo, by having the system that's in place, you are making a choice. And so it's not as simple as just saying, well, we should just keep going as they are because there are inherent choices in that. But I think it is very important, I think, to have a distinction between what I'm allowed to say and do other people need to listen to what I have to say, and how can they make choices to curate that. I think that's not a free speech question, right? That's a question of, as a consumer, what do I want to hear?
Yeah, there are some interesting papers in law about the right against compelled listening, and I think that the platforms kind of cross that boundary. They're in a sense they're compelling listening.
A general comment that I wanted to make, because I feel like some people are starting to have to leave, is that all of the stuff that we were talking about today is places where there's like a lot of really ongoing active research that all three of us are engaged in, as well as a bunch of other people around MIT. And so if any of you are listening to this and thinking, oh, this is cool, I would like to get involved in this research, like as a UROP or a grad student RA or whatever, in whatever capacity, you should let us know. We're always looking for people that want to get involved in this stuff.
Perfect.
So you should
Perfect.
send emails
Yes.
if
Thank
you want
you.
to do this.
Thank you so much for that. And I know there's probably several questions in the room, and there are many questions coming through via the internet. So I think we have a microphone stand, so please go ahead and we'll alternate between our virtual attendees and our in-person attendees.
Hi, thank you. Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So I actually wanted to disagree with some of the things that basically all of you panelists said.
Are we allowing that? Are we
I
allowing
don't think so.
disagreement?
I think that
This
we'll
is the
design
this
around
is the
this.
comment
Yeah.
section here.
You can say it, but we don't have to listen.
So I come from a background where I've experienced authoritarianism myself, and I feel very strongly that these days the patterns of behavior that I see on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and the Republicans, are taking this country very quickly toward authoritarianism, and those things are rooting those patterns of behavior. One thing that I see is, generally speaking, most people have become very reactive, and there is a paper from Iris Berend, I think, from Northeastern University. She's a psychologist, which I haven't read the paper, but I heard about it from Noam Chomsky, so I believe him. In which she appeared to prove empirically that humans are empiricists by nature, so that we believe things, we are more reactive. We believe things, we associate things with our beliefs, and I feel this is becoming a more widespread thing in the current Western society in general, where people have become very reactive and they don't take the step back, as some of you said, of course, to think more critically, to engage. But maybe I take a step back, and maybe and this is more like a comment, by the way, so I would love to hear your thoughts on this. One thing that I feel is dying is free expression. So I think the best way to prove, if you believe that where we are right now is due to the progress that humanity has made. If you want to simulate humanity, meaning, if we believe this is the current state of the truth in the world, how have we got here? I would say free expression has been the core crucial thing for that. And the way people are defining these days as free expression is, if I feel sensitive about something, you don't have the right to say it, or I don't want to get engaged in it, so you don't have to even say it yourself. So free expression of other people are crossing into boundaries of free expressions of everyone else. So free expression is being interpreted without realizing by many people as if tool to free suppression, maybe I should say, which is causing information not to flow and truth not to get discovered. In the past 300 years or so, the history of this country, the way I interpreted this, it paved the path to discover the truth in the most stable way possible in the human history. But I feel these days people, because they're defining their free expression rights as somehow, they're using it to suppress other people in every way and define what things matter more, what things don't matter more. Like elites things are becoming more top down rather than bottom up.
Yeah, no, please.
So yeah, so I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And
I think, as I was just saying, I think more expression is always better, right? I think that, and I think that the tools
Because you were saying people should vote
that we've
things down,
created
so-
have actually have significantly empowered greater free expression. And I disagree with the people who are trying to prevent expression by having the platforms limit what is said. But I think that the platforms are failing to empower people to not listen if they don't want to listen. Like, free expression does not mean people have to listen. Free expression means that you have to have the right to say what you want. But there is no right to force everybody else to hear you. And that is something that the platforms are not currently offering.
We have a virtual question that's come in. So what is the role of our educational system, especially in higher education, in preparing our students to be knowledgeable consumers and producers of information?
Could use some work.
Well, so something that I would like to see is encouraging people to take more responsibility for trying to curate, or to like, I would like people who are educated to come out with a sense that they should use their education to, assess information that's out there, to call out things that are not correct, to support things that are. I think a lot of times, we talk about bystanders a lot in the context of discrimination and such, but I think we have a lot of bystanders right now when it comes to misinformation. Like, you see that stuff go by on your social network and you're like, it's just more misinformation. I'll ignore it. Now again, this is partially because the platforms don't really let us do anything about it. So I'd like to see the platforms change to empower individuals, and I'd like to see individuals feel empowered and responsible for trying to do something to improve the quality of information that's out there.
And I guess I would say that I think that like critical thinking and digital literacy are both things that are very important, and that we have tools for measuring variation across individuals in those things, and we see that it predicts all kinds of important outcomes. And it seems like it would be great to try to have some, like, as part of the educational system, trying to teach how better to do critical thinking and teach digital literacy. I think it's a lot less clear how to do that effectively. There are some people that are working on it, but like the assessment part is not really that great. And so I think that that is another place that is like a really important place for doing research and doing assessment and figuring out like what are things that are effective ways of teaching people about how to think, more critically and more accurately about information and consume things more effectively in digital spaces and stuff like that.
I think just to sort of build on what Dave's saying is that we do a really good job of measuring variation across people on these different skills and traits, but we don't do a very good job of having interventions that can actually move people on them. And so I think, but sort of in the popular discourse, I think there was an assumption that these things exist, and that if only we taught digital literacy, then the problem would go away. Like, well, maybe it would if we had a good intervention that did that. So I think that as David is saying, that there needs to be a lot of work on that. But it's not that the solution is out there and we're just not implementing it. That we need a lot more research on that.
And in fairness, I think there are a lot of people that are working on developing those kinds of courses and stuff, but I think that those people are typically not that assessment oriented.
Yeah.
And so people will make something that they think is good and say, here, I made this thing, great. But
It's very kind, very
and
kind
we're-
language.
Right, and so I feel like some kind of collaboration around evaluating the effectiveness of trainings that people are creating would be really useful.
The builders and the observers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And there are wonderful successes out there that we should be learning from. Like, I look at Wikipedia as this sort of amazing example of a very large community that has developed a process for distilling the truth from all of the information that's out there, and understanding how they do that. One of my long-range goals, like it's a research project that I've wanted to for a long time and haven't executed yet, is to just try and figure out whether Wikipedia can be learned. Like whether all the people who are not currently part of that process can learn to assess information the way that people who currently are engaged in it are.
Yes, come forth with your question. Thank you.
Hi. So I have a question sort of along these same lines about engagement, and I'm wondering, in terms of the research you've done so far, when you encounter people who are more confident about self-selecting into engaging with political material and people who self-select into engaging with entertainment, do you see demographic patterns about who is more confident in engaging with politics? Do you see patterns between people who are overconfident in their ability to effectively engage with politics? And then what do you think the potential is for interventions, if there are interventions necessary for populations that are underconfident? Like, do you understand what the patterns are for why they're underconfident? And is it related to their demographic identity?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of really interesting empirical work on this, sort of the correlates of political interest. Right, we know that there's gender differences, especially when it comes to questions of confidence, racial differences, again, when it comes to questions of competence. So I think that is, right, so the answer to that question is like, yes, there are these predictable patterns, and yes, they have real implications for thinking about, who participates in politics and who doesn't. But so again, thinking about interventions that would get people, thinking that that's the trickier thing. Like, again, we do a really good job of observing differences, but this question about, that there's a new wave of work in political socialization, which is, this question is big in the 60s, is like, how do people become interested in politics or not? And the biggest, so the biggest predictor is, what do your parents do, right? Like, do you grow up in an environment where people talk about politics or not? And so, but then that creates these cycles of inequity, it's sort of this is stuff I'm interested in. Earlier work spoke to that, but I think it's a similar sort of thing, is that we can measure the differences, but fixing those differences with different programs is a very difficult task.
Just because I think it's implicit in the question and answer, I think it's worth at least noticing the assumption that getting people to participate more in politics is a good thing. And I will flag an interesting post by Robin Hanson, who's something of an iconoclast, but he published an interesting article sort of arguing mathematically that for people who are uninformed, it may be in their best interests to not participate, right? That the outcomes of votes will be better if they don't vote.
Yeah.
Although I guess the flip of that is like that I think that the
Better for them. Right? Like that it's in their own interest.
Well,
but I think that the idea of the intervention is to get people to be more knowledgeable and interested, which leads to both knowledge and engagement.
Yes.
Right. So no, I think about I think about political engagement rather than political participation. Kind of this taste for politics. But I think you're absolutely right. Watch what we wish for. So there's this. In the 1950s, the American Political Science Association authored a report that said, what we need in this country are political parties that have distinct agendas that are dispersed from each other. There's too much sort of in the middle, Tweedledee, Tweedledum. It's like, here you go, right? How you like that, right? And so, again, I think we do want to be very careful about that kind of prediction.
We have another question coming in from our virtual audience, a virtual audience member. So should universities adopt policies or create policies to address misinformation and disinformation?
Well, again, I certainly don't think that they should try at an institutional level to say, we're deciding that this is misinformation and it shouldn't be shared. I think it would be great for them to develop better channels for disseminating their own assessments. Again, this ties back to research that my group is doing, but as I said, we built this tool that lets people annotate, this is accurate, this is not accurate, so on and so forth. Imagine if the entire faculty body of MIT was doing this with some frequency, and there was an MIT feed that you could go to that would deliver the sort of consensus assessment of the entire MIT faculty about, climate science and vaccines and so on and so forth. I think this could be a tremendously valuable resource. Although perhaps what I'm saying is that we should adopt mechanisms for dealing with misinformation, which is somewhat different from adopting policies that forbid it.
Yes, come forth with your
Hi.
question.
So a lot of your research is focused on interventions or platform design decisions, right, that could help combat misinformation. But obviously, that contrasts with what the platforms are willing to do, and they want to optimize for engagement or advertising revenue, and they're not interested in putting these interventions in place. So what do you see as the way past that crossroads? Do you think government regulation of some sort, or some sort of user collectively revolting against platforms is the way to go? Or what's the kind of path forward past that?
My sense is that it's a lot more complicated than saying platforms don't want to do, don't care about misinformation and don't want to do misinformation interventions. The platforms are very heterogeneous groups. And so there are a lot of people in each of these platforms that the job is working on misinformation, and those people really are interested and committed to trying to do things to reduce misinformation. And the question is, they're also typically very hierarchical organizations, and so in order to get the things implemented, they need the people at the top to sign off. And I think that's where the issue arises a lot, is how do you get the people at the top to say, yes, okay, this is a thing to do. So my general attitude has been terms of specialization, I'm specializing in questions that are not that question. And there are people that are thinking about that, and that is good.
Well, so, I mean, you asked kind of three possibilities, right? Do you want to, technological interventions, or trying to get the platforms to change, or sort of government intervention, or users revolting against the platforms? And, our approach is to aim for all of the above. Some of the tools that we built are tools that manipulate existing social media feeds in the interest of the user. We've also built tools that create alternative platforms for the users. I mean, not that we expect them to take off, but that sort of demonstrate the idea of having a different platform. Right now, I have a student who's working on building sort of an infrastructure on which anybody can create their own social platform to really maximize the diversity of what's out there. I think that legislation is also essential because of the lock-in effects that you have on social platforms. People don't revolt because they would be leaving all their friends behind if they went to a different platform. So, we've seen examples like there are laws requiring people to be able to export their data from these platforms. There are also, now there's the GDPR, which enforces certain private, so there are things that governments could do, and I think that governments could do more to, again, force the platforms to let users do what they want, right? And the counter argument is that, well, if users did what they want, we wouldn't be able to make money off of them. But I don't think that's a great justification for forcing people to do things a certain way. So I would like to see some additional legislation as well, but I think that at the same time, we can be working on technological interventions, either that can be sort of cooperative to the platforms or that can be hostile to the platforms.
Thank you. You can come forth and you'll be our last question.
Oh, okay, no pressure to me.
A lot of pressure.
I literally had the same question, so I'm just going to ask a follow-up. Beyond the platforms, we talked a lot about the polarization of society. What do you think can be done, like, beyond the platforms to kind of cross that bridge? Because something has to be done, right? It doesn't seem to me that it can continue this way forever. So what do you think can be done?
So in the reducing polarization vein, and also to clarify, there's like two different kinds of polarization at least that people talk about. One is issue polarization, which is like people having different views on policies, or sorting, which is like the two parties having sort of homogenous views on policies. And the other thing is what they call affective polarization, which is hating people from the other side. And I think the affective polarization is sort of pretty clearly normatively not good. And I feel like the issue polarization, it's less clear whether that's a bad thing or not. But I was one of the PIs on this big strengthening democracy challenge, where we got a whole bunch of different academics and civil society groups to submit interventions aimed at reducing affective polarization and support for undemocratic practices and things like that. And then we tested all of them together in a massive study with like tens of thousands of people. And we found lots of different interventions will make people hate the other side less. And a few interventions can get people to have less support for undemocratic candidates and policies and violence. And it's basically, there's a ton of people doing research on this. There's lots of different things out there. If you Google strengthening democracy challenge, you will get results of testing 25 different ways to do it. And you see some worked and some didn't, depending on what the outcome was.
I think another thing is that, I don't think it's so much on the platforms as it is on politicians. And so I feel like this is I feel like if there's one thing that's rubbed off on me, it is sort of like really the politicians are at fault here. Right? So kind of bring us back to these themes of disinformation. It's, thinking about, sort of the narrative around the 2020 election and Trump claiming that he won, right? That's the problem, right? Is that you have politicians who are pushing particular points of view. And, in this case, pointing to a Republican politician, that there's a lot of research saying, is it on both sides? And the answer is maybe a little bit. But I think in general, right, that we need to put the blame on the politicians who are broadcasting to the people who listen to them, who don't care much about politics, who don't follow politics, that I think that that's the bigger problem, as opposed to thinking about, how can we get the platforms to work in this vein. That's not to say that we want to let the platforms off the hook. I think that that's important as well. But I think the more fundamental problem is how politicians are not just talking about political controversies, but how they're engaging in that, and kind of the relationship between truth and fact at the level of the politician. As a political scientist, that's the thing that really scares me. As a citizen, too, that's the thing that really scares me.
And so the question to me is, what can we as citizens and technology companies and media organizations and everything do to try to hold politicians to account to stop doing stop driving the problem?
Well, so my answer, again, as a technologist, I think about technology. I don't have good ideas in sort of social science. And I'll come back to what I said at the beginning, which is that I see computers as tools that can kind of make us more efficient at doing the things that we're trying to do. I think there are lots of real-world efforts to sort of bring opponents together to communicate with each other. And I'm always interested in technological support for those kinds of bringing people together. Several years ago, the one project I've done in this space was a student came to see me with an idea, and I said, that's never going to work, but she really wanted to do it, so I let her try, and it worked great, which was to have people, it was based on the work of Jonathan Haidt, who has this moral framing theory about why people disagree and hate each other. And it's for more subtle, it's for more minor reasons, or it's there's less differences between the two sides than you would imagine from the way they hate each other. And Haidt's work tries to let people understand how similar the two sides actually are, that they share common values. And this particular project involved giving people a tool that let them sort of look at content which had been created by the other side and annotate it with the values that were being articulated in that content. And it was that process of annotation, it led the annotators to realize that, oh, this other side shares a lot of my values. Maybe they're not as awful. They may have come to a different conclusion, but maybe they're not horrible people. So it's to eliminate that affective polarization.
And that actually is a general theme that came out of the Strengthening Democracy Challenge, is that a lot of the most effective interventions were one these tried to correct what they call meta-perceptions, which is correct the extent to which people see the other side as being extreme. Mm-hmm. And so it turns out that actually, because most people don't care about politics very much, the average opinions of the people on the two sides of the aisle are much more similar than you would think from listening to the people that yell the loudest on Twitter.
Right, well, or that Twitter surfaces, or that the feed surface, right?
That's right?
Even if they're not yelling the loudest, the platforms make sure that those extreme opinions are the ones that are visible, because those generate lots of engagement.
Right.
It's a good little full circle wrap
Dave,
there.
Adam, and David, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much.
And thanks again to the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, the Sloan School of Management, and the MIT Libraries for co-sponsoring today's event. Thank you for attending. And all registrants will receive a link of the recording as soon as the discussion is available. Have a good day, everyone, and thank you again.
And drop the line.